with PCOS, it is a syndrome. And so it's not necessarily always the same in every single person. And it's something that can change throughout the years. But bringing it back to the diagnostic criteria is sometimes how we go about looking at it. So oftentimes there's irregular cycles, cysts on the ovaries, and then signs of androgen excess. So again, that testosterone, the DHEA, which can result in things like acne and hair growth on the face, various other parts of the body, as well as hair loss. So what's producing those high levels of androgenic hormones? What's blocking ovulation? And is the brain actually able to signal a cycle at regular intervals month to month?
Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast. I am so excited to be here with the feeling very pregnant, Dr. Micaela Gregory. That's what we were talking about coming on here. Pregnancy, AI, kids, saving for kids, like the conversations we have internally.
Always
Welcome,
fun.
Micaela. So today we are going to dive in and talk a little bit about the new world of PCOS. It is not really that new, but I think one of the things that's really important that we talk about is how things have changed and what has changed and what hasn't changed in the management of PCOS, especially now that we have all of these, what we call GLP-1 receptor agonists. So we've got our Ozempic, we have mounjaro, we have all of these different medications, and they are oftentimes being discussed similar to the birth control pill used to be discussed, right? You go on this, it solves your problems, and you continue. And just like the birth control pill, we know that going on the birth control pill is masking a symptom. It's not necessarily solving a problem. And as much as these GLP-1 RAs, which is what I'll call them, can do similar things, there's also a lot that we need to know. So before we dive into that, though, I would love for you to break down, Micaela, for anyone who is not familiar, how do we think about PCOS and advanced women's health, and just break down what is polycystic ovarian syndrome? So polycystic ovarian syndrome is a hormonally mediated condition. And I think so often we think about it as a sex hormone mediated condition. So estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, but there can be so much more encompassed in there. And so when I kind of explain to patients what can cause PCOS, that oftentimes lays out like the thing that we're looking at. And so we can have abnormalities in how the brain actually signals the cycle. And so that's kind of the most like top one, right? So the brain's not necessarily signaling the ovaries to do their job properly. The other thing that can happen is something impacting ovulation. And so things that we have to think about there are androgens. So I mentioned the hormone testosterone earlier. Testosterone fits in that category of androgens, and so does another hormone called DHEAS, both of which can be elevated sometimes in PCOS, and those can block ovulation. The other thing we think about here, this is where insulin comes in. So insulin being the primary hormone that's controlling blood sugar, that can also block the body from producing ovulation, which can lead to irregular cycles. And so with PCOS, it is a syndrome, and so it's not necessarily always the same in every single person, and it's something that can change throughout the years. But bringing it back to the diagnostic criteria is sometimes how we go about looking at it. So oftentimes there's irregular cycles, cysts on the ovaries, and then signs of androgen excess. So again, that testosterone, the DHEA, which can result in things like acne and hair growth on the face, various other parts of the body, as well as hair loss. So, and you actually have to have 2 out of 3 for like typical diagnosis. I know that sometimes that's always being argued and changing and stuff like that, but oftentimes those are the things that we're looking at. What's producing those high levels of
androgenic hormones, what's blocking ovulation, and is the brain actually able to signal a cycle at regular intervals month to month?
So as Dr. Michaela was saying, hormones are such a big piece and insulin is such a big piece. And one of the things that came up in the early use of Ozempic was pregnancies. So we heard all about these Ozempic babies, as people were calling it. And that was because there was a change in insulin signaling that changed testosterone, that changed signals back for ovulation. And then we ended up in the situation where people were ovulating when they weren't before. And people were getting pregnant by accident or intentional. And it was such an interesting time because I was getting a ton of questions about it in practice with respect to PCOS. And people were almost viewing it as this requirement, like a part of the fertility clinic process, right? You come in, you get your letrozole, you get your Ozempic, you get your cycle monitoring, and then you go from there. And so I think it's a really important conversation to be had because just like any tool, any of these GLP-1 arrays are tools. And so what they're doing, and it's very interesting because when you look at the original research, what it said was that they are helping the body to release more insulin and sensitize the body to insulin. So insulin resistance is a state where your body makes a lot of a hormone so that it can drive glucose into the cells because the signal has to get louder and louder to move glucose where it needs to go. And one of the things that I think is very important for people to understand is that when we talk about insulin resistance, you can have a lot of fuel sitting in compartments that we don't want it, right? So you can have fat sitting in your fat stores. You can have glucose sitting in your blood. You can have free fatty acids sitting in your blood. You can have all of these things, but your cells think you're starving. Your brain thinks you're starving. Your ovaries aren't getting the nutrients. We see all of these things come up. And so, in theory, if we are then adding more insulin when we take these medications, we're not necessarily getting the benefits to testosterone. We're not necessarily getting the benefits, but we are seeing those nutrients pushed places they need to go. And so subsequently, what we found is that for a lot of people, the improvement in communication, the improvement in the body saying, okay, glucose, you go here and it goes here. Okay, fat, you can come out and be used. That improvement in communication and what we call insulin signaling allowed people's insulin to drop. It's allowed a lot of positives, which we then can see result in people losing weight. We can see result in people dealing with, right? But benefiting from less testosterone, benefiting from more ovulatory cycles. But just like again, as we mentioned before, the birth control pill, these medications, when not used appropriately, only benefit us so long as we take them. There's when used appropriately to lose a percentage of body fat mass, maintain your lean muscle mass, all of these things, when used appropriately, we absolutely can see long-term benefits, but that's not always the case. And they come with a lot of side effects. So I know this is something we all see a lot in practice, but what are some of the general side effects that you have seen from Mounjaro, Ozempic, and some of these other medications?
The number one side effects that people talk about are the gastrointestinal side effects. So, nausea being probably the most common that I see. And I have definitely had patients who experience it short term and they feel better. I've definitely had patients who are actually able to kind of get over that. And then lots of like bowel changes. So whether they're getting more constipated, sometimes they do even go on the looser side of things, more bloating, like heartburn, stuff like that. So those are kind of the most common side effects that I see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree in terms of like visible side effects, those are the things that people come in hoping for support with. And you're right, like there's many situations where we can help with that, we can support that and then go from there. There was a doctor, oh my God, bless, on a reel on Instagram that someone sent me. And it was this doctor teaching people how to overcome Ozempic induced constipation. And his whole outcome was like, if you eat vegetables, everything will be fine. And I just about imploded because it's like, oh no, this is what's wrong with the world. We have a medication. People don't have an appetite. It is intentionally slowing the rate your stomach empties. It's intentionally changing hunger signals. It's going to slow peristalsis for a lot of people, which is the contraction of their bowels. But if you just eat vegetables, you'll be fine.
We'll be fine.
Which plays into the other conversation, which one of the, I think, biggest detriments to women with PCOS when they're using these medications as their source of management is the massive amount of muscle loss and metabolic decreased function, especially if you're focusing on eating only vegetables. Have you been monitoring that in practice? Have you been educating people on that in practice? I know it's a subject that a lot of people are struggling with, like how they're communicating that to their patients and how to support that.
Yeah, it's not always an easy conversation. And I find more and more people are coming in, maybe their doctor suggested it or they want to ask their doctor about it and they want to know, like, what's your opinion on it? Here's all the things that I've read, right? And I think one of the tough things is that as a naturopathic doctor, you so badly want to look at the whole picture. And so as opposed to focus on this one thing, right? Which is what the medication is focusing on. Because just like you said, we can have side effects of medication like that where muscle mass is decreasing, which can worsen all of the underlying factors of PCOS, right? If you have someone who's nauseous all the time, the most common things I hear is I have a really hard time getting my protein in because I just feel sick all the time, right? So different than like first trimester of pregnancy. You think you look at beef and you're like, probably not today. Gonna go for the
So
toast and
true. Yeah.
noodles. And
Yeah.
then it's like, okay, we're not prioritizing what's going to fix things on the other side of this, right?
Yeah.
Which makes it hard. And so they do end up being pretty lengthy conversations where we're talking about all of those pros and cons in people, right? And I think it is like when patients say, like, oh, I'm concerned that, I'm going to get off of it, my weight's going to go up. I'm concerned about losing muscle mass. I'm concerned about getting my nutrition. I'm like, yeah, those are all very valid concerns, right? The hard part is we can't necessarily sit and predict who's going to have what side effects and who's going to be able to maintain that muscle mass and stuff like that. But one of my biggest conversations I have with people is the importance of maintaining protein and maintaining weight training, right? And unfortunately, what I see a lot is that people are already not prioritizing those things. And so it becomes a bit of a catch-22. It's like, well, if I felt better, I'd have more energy and more time to potentially add in this resistance training and eat better. But that's not necessarily losing some weight, right?
Yeah.
Using a
A
medication like
thousand
that is
percent.
not necessarily going to guarantee you feeling like you can do those things because you're not guaranteed to have more energy. You're not guaranteed to want to eat healthier and feel like you have more capacity to cook better for yourselves.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, there's a lot to that conversation with people for sure.
It's such a huge piece because I had a patient come in and she was essentially sold this as a PCOS drug. So she was like, this will solve all of your problems, is what the doctor said. And she lost weight, absolutely did, suffered so much during that process, felt so exhausted. She was like, I feel like my skin has changed. My hair has changed. My hair is now falling out for a completely different reason than it was before. Like, so many of these things came up. And when we measured, she realistically was probably eating 40 to 60 grams of protein per day, maximum. As someone who also struggles to get my protein intake in, I realized recently on the Advanced Women's Health Challenge, I am like,
We all did.
oh my God. Like, I understand, but the research now is coming in showing we want to have about a gram per pound of body weight to
I know
maintain
Fran
lean
has
muscle
something
mass.
about that. And I was like, oh my gosh, this just keeps getting harder.
It just keeps getting higher. And I think that's the thing, because when we're looking at muscle preservation, you have to have a pretty loud signal, right? Insulin has a very insulinogenic protein, right? Animal-based protein specifically, but protein is very insulinogenic. There's a high insulin demand for it. So that means in order to be able to eat that, to preserve your muscles, you have to eat less carbohydrates than you were before. And these are the conversations. I don't want to have these to scare anyone. Medications can be incredibly helpful. I advocate for them in many situations, but definitely not as a cure to a condition that is lifestyle derived, especially when there are so many potential negatives that can come up as part of this conversation. So I just want people to think about that in a bit of a different way, right? Is absolutely you can begin this, but here's what you still need to do, right? So we talk about this as a new world of PCOS management and it's all sexy and great, but here's what you still need to do. Here's what we still know that is still proven to be true in the research that has decades and decades of accuracy. Like, here's what we actually need to do to improve someone's symptoms when they have PCOS, whether they're on Ozempic or not. So why don't you walk us through?
So yeah, that's a good thing to go over. So, and like you said, sometimes the oldest, boringest things, right? The things that don't change. Like, it's like I was listening to this, not to like side note too much, but I was listening to this podcast on this like the guy that did a bunch of nutrition research. His name is totally escaping my brain right now. And he was just like, I hate to break it to you, but it's actually pretty boring. Like, limit
Oh, was
processed.
that Arnold guy? Oh, what's his
I
name?
couldn't even tell you.
Was it on Huberman?
It was. You
Yeah,
said
okay.
it.
I think I was listening to this episode too because he was talking about like how much protein can you eat after meals? Should
Yes.
you eat before or
Okay.
after, within 1 hour or 2 hours? I'll look up his name while we're chatting. And I was like, I love how boring this man is. He's
Yeah, like
like,
just
eat
like
protein and
I'm
move.
sorry, I got nothing sexy for you. Just like eat
Yeah.
protein. Your diet should be mostly plant-based in the sense that you're eating a lot of like
Yeah.
food from the earth and like stop eating processed foods. Like that was it. Like it was just so like, oh, okay. Like it is actually is that simple.
The thing I loved, I didn't love a lot of things about that episode, I'll be completely honest. Some of how he was talking, I was like, like I twitched about some things. But truthfully, how he just simplified, like, you don't need to eat 30 grams of protein before and then 10 grams of protein after, and then this. And when you listen, I will find it and put it in here for you guys. But when you listen, the thing I found so fascinating was that this researcher, you could tell he like wanted to pull out like this
Yeah. Well,
super
shouldn't we be
sexy
getting this?
information.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
He was like leading this conversation to try to get more and more information. And he just absolutely was not getting it. And I loved it so much. I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, it was sometimes I like those conversations. All to say that sometimes the most basic things can be the most powerful, right? And the things that,
Yeah.
and sometimes they don't necessarily move the needle as much as people want because we have a fair share of people who walk in to advanced women's health who are already doing quote unquote the right stuff, right? And that's why they're
Absolutely.
stuck because that's not getting them places, right? So, but those foundations have to be there no matter what, right? And so, from a PCOS perspective, even though we can see like the weight change and the insulin sometimes change on those types of medications, we don't necessarily see changes in androgens per se, right? And so that DHEA, those testosterones can still be quite elevated, which can still impact things like ovulation, can still give you those really persistent, annoying symptoms like the hair growth and the acne and stuff like that. And we can still see peripheral insulin changes, right? So we can still have, even though centrally when it comes to blood sugar control, there might not be as high levels of insulin, we can have insulin still peripherally, which can impact all those symptoms as well. So that's a really big one. In terms of the underlying stuff, the muscle mass, I know we kind of already talked about that, right? But when people come off of those medications, if there is muscle mass that's been lost, that can lead to like worse glucose control on the other side of being on a medication, right? And so those basics of resistance training, moving your body, eating in a way that supports blood sugar control, working on androgens. We can even get into the whole oxidative stress conversation in terms of like what else is underlying. We see microbiome changes in those with PCOS, right? We see higher levels of inflammatory bacteria in the gut. That's driving some of those insulin related changes. That's driving some of the liver changes. That can drive the androgen changes. And that's not necessarily being fixed by the medication, right? Higher levels of cortisol sometimes, stress hormones, all those, like all those changes that we see in PCOS, which are truthfully so many, right? We're not manipulating all of those just by taking a medication. And so you really have to sit down and think about the whole person and think about their lifestyle and think about how their PCOS is presenting, do their lab work, figure out where things are at, and continue to treat all those underlying things, right? It's not to say, don't go on a medication. We have another way to go about doing this. It's like, okay, let's have this conversation. Let's look at the pros and the cons, and let's still treat all of the underlying things so that if you go on it, maximize your chance at success. And when you do come off of it, you actually are in a better place when you come off of it, right?
Yeah,
And we dealt with those underlying factors.
Absolutely. His name's Alan Aragon, for anyone wondering.
Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself, and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started.
I couldn't agree with you anymore. And I think I want to break apart a couple things that we're talking about here. One is you mentioned, and I'm so glad you did, we have a lot of patients that come to Advanced Women's Health eating a gram per pound of body weight, right? Of protein. They are eating all their protein. They're not eating carbohydrates. They are like resistance training 3 times a week. Their weight is not moving. They are not ovulating. Their hair growth continues to worsen, and it is demoralizing. Those are patients that we, honestly, I feel like I can say it confidently, seeing thousands of patients, we are uniquely equipped to help manage because we can personalize things to what's going on in your body, to your blood work. Like, this is a system we've worked so many times. And so if you were in that boat and you're saying, okay, I have tried Ozempic and I've done these things and I am not better, there is still hope for you. There are still things to do. There's so much we can do to support and manage that. So I just wanted to put that out there because I think you're right. Like, we oftentimes, when it's written down that simple or simplified so significantly, so many patients immediately feel like it doesn't apply to them anymore. They're, you know what I mean? They're like, this doesn't work for me. There's still always something we can do that is going to work and support. But I think the other piece that is really the elephant in the room is when it comes to PCOS being a syndrome, being so many symptoms, being so many things, as you and I have talked about, there is not one treatment. Medical doctors have the birth control pill up until now, the birth control pill and metformin. Those are the 2 things that we have shown outside of a fertility clinic and using letrozole or what they used to use as Clomid to induce ovulation. They do not have a lot of options. The mass majority of the research suggests that a 5 to 10% body weight loss shifts metabolic function, shifts insulin, shifts inflammatory status of the body. That's why people always try to achieve that 5 to 10. It's actually because it does seem to switch some metabolic processes. And so I was talking to a medical doctor and they were like, well, if we can get a patient there within a couple of weeks versus a couple of months, like, isn't that a good thing? And what I had said is we do not have research on that, right? We do not have a research to suggest in this moment that is a good thing in the long term. They could be losing muscle. They could be losing water. They could be losing so many different things. So I think their heart's in the right place. And I understand, but losing 5 to 10% of your body weight over a 6-month period of time in fat is very different than over a few weeks under eating, shifting our gut microbiome, because you mentioned like gut microbiome issues can be associated with PCOS and insulin resistance. They can get worse if you're not pooping, because then you just become this glorified composter. You have all these bugs that are building up. There's going to be a whole Ozempic microbiome conversation, and it's not going to be good. I can promise you that. Ozempic farts are real. You can find it on Reddit, but like, these are real things. And so I understand the mechanism, but this is a very North American, Western world approach. If we can do it faster, it must be better. And women's health does not always work like that. And I think that is one of the big things that I want people to take away from this conversation is these are tools. And there is a lot of conversation right now about low dosing Ozempic. So using, and I can't remember, I think it's mounjaro, the tur, whatever. I don't memorize prescription names or drug names, but there's like tur something. Anyways, one of them is has been shown to decrease a lot of the GI side effects. And again, dosing in very small amounts of that medication can have some benefits to food noise, can have some benefits to cravings, can have some benefits to insulin without the downsides. But we're in a new world. And so back to what Micaela was saying before, what we know to be true is that if you eat a low insulin demand diet, if you move your body in some way, shape, or form, preferably insulin or preferably resistance training, and you correct the gut microbiome, the stress response, and use herbs like resveratrol, saw palmetto, reishi, green tea, right? These different herbs, white peony, what am I missing? Licorice, these anti-androgen herbs, you can get better and get on that path to feeling better, which is, I think, what people are after no matter what.
100%. Yeah, just as you were chatting, and even like, it was such a good thing to bring up the birth control pill and how that is thought about. And I haven't really thought about the correlation between these two things, which is very interesting because it is very similar, right? In terms of like, oh, we're just prescribing this now. And unfortunately, you don't have time in medical doctor's office to have these conversations. And so it's so much more nuanced than that. And you have to think about what other options there are and what the pros and cons are. And again, it's not to say, I think neither of us sit on the camp of like, it's neither the best thing ever, nor is it like evil and shouldn't be used, right? But it's like, it's a tool we have and we need to determine what tools are going to be most effective for you and think about that not only in the short term, but also in the long term, right? Which is really important.
Totally. It's terzepatide, by the way. This is my day today. I'm searching words as we go. I think it's important that people see the real end of these conversations, right? So then let's leave with some really clear takeaways. We are in a new world of PCOS management. We're talking about it differently. I'm sure we said the same thing when birth control pills and letrozole and things like that became appropriate. But I would love your order of events. Patient who's listening to this has just been diagnosed with PCOS. What does that look like? What does that workup look like? What are you thinking through in terms of the order of intervention or the order of events to get them ovulating, to get them reducing some of their androgenic symptoms?
Yeah. So starting like, again, really boring basic stuff is just understanding what their symptoms are. Because PCOS is a syndrome, those symptoms can arise from multiple different places. And so really trying to piece together what do we think is contributing to the symptoms that this person's experiencing and getting a really good idea of what those symptoms are. Oftentimes, after gathering that information, we'll run some lab work to actually assess those things. So whether the doctor's done lab work, whether we're doing additional things, sometimes pelvic ultrasound is really important in that stage too. The amount of people who have never had a pelvic ultrasound and just got diagnosed because they had acne in an irregular period is just wild. So the investigation phase is really important because then we know what we're dealing with. And then typically what we'll do is we'll kind of sit down, we'll go over that lab work and be like, hey, here are all the things that we need to look at, right? Here are all the underlying factors. Are your androgens high? Are there stress response changes? Are like, what does the insulin response actually look like? Are there inflammatory markers? And look at what are all of our options to hit all of these things, right? And sometimes that medication conversation will come up depending on someone's number. But oftentimes, I guess that decision really comes from what the state of the person's foundational health is coming in. Like we talked about, sometimes you have those patients that have already, quote unquote, done everything. And you're like, hey, let's try some herbs first for a couple months. Let's add in some supports here and there based on what we're seeing. We'll give it X amount of months to look for changes. And then we might be revisiting this conversation. right, in terms of adding in medication. Sometimes they don't even need to go down that route, right? There's so much, like, depending on what they're doing, right? If there's no support whatsoever, oftentimes there's lots of change we can make before kind of having that medication conversation. But that's kind of how I would typically approach it, is like, figure out exactly what you're dealing with. Look at all the possible options for dealing with all of those dysfunctions potentially. And then look at what is our order of intervention, right? Ideally getting foundations where they need to be, adding in some supplements and herbs, and then leaning into medications if and when required, and then kind of bringing that pros and cons conversation at that point in time.
And when you say foundations, that we talk about that a lot internally, but just for everyone listening, what do you mean by that? What are the PCOS foundations?
The boring stuff. Eating well, sleeping. But yes, so making sure someone's actually sleeping, making sure that we've addressed stress for sure, eating away in a way that's supporting insulin in a positive way. Again, like we always talk about, we don't expect perfection, but like if the diet's really not there, the thing that has to be there, whether you're on a medication or not, it has to be there, right? So that's a big foundation too, as well. And then the movement that we kind of talked about. So like, it's crazy how sometimes that foundational stuff can just get so overlooked and look extra great when it's like, oh, I don't have to put in the work to do those foundational things, because as we talked about, some of them are just hard to do, right? Like you have to make an active effort every single day of your life to do those things, right? And you have to make it a priority. And it's, even though a medication seems like a way to get away with not doing those things, at some point in your life, it's not going to work out for you if you don't have those things in place.
Yeah. And I think that's why I love what we do. Because, for example, if you're just saying, I'm going to eat enough protein and I'm going to not eat refined foods and etc., the mass majority of people have a stress related trigger with food. They reach for alcohol, they reach for sugar, they reach for something like that when they are stressed. And so we factor that into our conversation. That's why we talk so much about the stress response. Yes, the stress response is a feeling you have throughout the day. You may or may not have anxiety, but how someone acts when their fight or flight response is activated is generally not in alignment with the goals they have for that day. And so using herbs, using mindfulness practices, whatever that looks like, to modify someone's responses throughout the course of the day can change the outcomes that they have on a day-to-day basis. It is such a critical piece. If you look and you're struggling because of diet, like with dietary patterns, because of the sheer amount of food noise you experience on a day-to-day basis, we have herbs for that. And we have medications for that at the lowest dosage, right? You can take half to a quarter of the entry dosage of either one of these GLP-RAs to see if it works for you. I have patients being pulled up to 3 milligrams plus of Ozempic. That is a massive dosage. If it doesn't work by a milligram, it's probably not going to work. Yes, do we have research that shows that people lose weight at 3 milligrams? We do. And we also have a lot of research to suggest a lot of that is lean muscle mass. So I think we have to go through the obstacles. When you have those foundations placed in place, we then, and this is the beauty of time, this is the beauty of exposure. We get to go through those obstacles and again, further map and match what is coming up. If you have a situation where you have PCOS, you have very fatty liver, you are going to struggle to get insulin out of your body. We know that you have decreased abilities to get insulin to clear, which means you have more fat storage capacity from each meal. This is something that's based on the research. So timing of your eating to those patterns is something that we can help with, something that we can outline. I tell patients this all the time. It is not just what you eat, it is when you eat. But yes, we are starting to see some research come out on Ozempic, on mounjaro in fatty liver. But we are also seeing that there is a bigger magnitude of benefit when you work on the gut microbiome. So what I want people to take away from this and know is that appropriate levels of appropriate medications will always be helpful. And we are in a society right now where we believe more is better and fast is better. And that is going to give people the long-term outcomes. And we are not in a new world of management, right? We are in the same world with new tools. And I think as doctors, we've talked about this before, one of our main jobs is informed consent, helping a patient to understand when something is appropriate, what the risks are, and how to navigate those risks to the best benefit. And I think this is a moment in time where I am just saying, as in general, we all need to be able to better communicate what that is. Because for decades, anti-androgenic herbs, insulin management, drinking enough water, right, and gut microbiome support has allowed women with PCOS to conceive, has allowed women with PCOS to be asymptomatic, has allowed women with PCOS to maintain their cardiovascular health, their metabolic health into their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. And so we do not have to have a medication to get those benefits. I have patients come in or call the clinic frantic because their doctor will not give it to them. And they think that's the only way they're going to get better. And that is not the case. And when you are working with someone who believes that medication is indicated, and it may very well be, they also should be helping you understand how to eat that much protein in a day while you don't have an appetite, how to move your body in such a way to continue to maintain muscle mass, because we do not in 10, 15 years from now want to be in a situation where we have people that are frail and osteoporotic and have severely worsening metabolic outcomes because of what they did to lose weight at a faster rate. So I feel like that is one of the big take homes I want people to hear, is that there's so many ways to do this. And as much as this is a conversation, and it's a medication that I recommend all the time. And I have seen patients do all the right things and then add it in and get the benefits and get pregnant and, you know what I mean? Reduce their hair loss and all of these types of things. But it's because they already knew how to eat best for their body. They already had those healthy patterns in place. They had that movement in place. We were able to deal with some of the underlying pieces, and then they could grow from there.
100%.
Very good. Any final words for women with PCOS, things that you think they need to hear? Because I know we both see lots and lots of it in practice.
Yeah, I do see a lot of it. I think the biggest thing that people should know, and kind of what I deal with a lot, is just the conversation around like the management of PCOS in social media, in doctors' offices and stuff like that. And so, people will come in and be like, oh, well, I read this and I read this. It causes them so much stress, right? And I think people should know that there are lots of options to manage. It becomes easier when we're able to investigate and know exactly what's going on. But if a single medication does not inherently feel right to you, there's a reason for that. And there are other options out there, right? There's the conversation around PCOS it's a scary one when you get onto social media, right? And so it's just like, I think it's so helpful to know that like there are practitioners out there that can walk you through that and talk about pros and cons for you specifically and look at all your options. And that would be the biggest thing that I think people should know.
Couldn't agree more. All right. Well, thank you for that, Dr. Micaela. Always a blast chatting. And I feel like people got a best of both worlds today. They get like how our inner minds work in the podcast we listen to, and also what we want people to know. So thank you so much, as usual, for coming on the Advanced Women's Health Podcast. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message, and that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.